Hi, I'm Valerie Little, violist of the Mill City String Quartet. Some of you may have heard us play. Back in February of 2020, we played at a whole bunch of schools in the Medford area. We really enjoyed our time out there, which was sponsored by the Brit Festival, and I'm happy to be here today to talk to you about sight reading. I love sight reading. I think it's really exciting. There's a lot of electricity that can go into reading a piece for the first time and capturing as many of the details as you can. It's also a really practical skill, especially for professional musicians, because sometimes we have performances where there is no rehearsal, like a religious event or a wedding or a party, where you're expected to just come and sit down and play the music without any rehearsal. I think the biggest tip that I can give is to perfect your rhythmic pulse and digesting rhythms really quickly. I once had a teacher tell me that if you play all the right notes but they're at the wrong time, it's still wrong. Whereas if you play mostly the right notes but your rhythm and pulse is impeccable, then your sight reading is going to be successful. Because you can always go back and practice for fluency in your left hand, but we really want to make sure that we're tracking where we are in terms of rhythm and pulse when we're sight reading. So what should we look at to be a successful sight reader? First thing is to check out the key signature, the time signature, and the tempo of the piece. This will give us a lot of information really quickly. We also want to scan ahead and look for dynamic changes, articulations, accidentals that may carry through the bar unless otherwise marked. If we're going to change clefs for violists and cellists, if we need our mutes at any point, and if there's any other sounds like sol tasto, sol ponticello, if there's any pizzicato. We want to try to grab as much of that as possible before we even play one note. So in the first excerpt that I'm going to play for you, it's from Mozart's 41st Symphony, also nicknamed the Jupiter. This was his last symphony. And the reason that I chose it is because it does have some pretty big dynamic and style contrasts. We have a forte theme that has a lot of rhythmic action. And then we also have kind of a counter melody that is piano and soft and very legato. It has slurs over many bars. It also has some interesting articulations. We want it to be nice and sparkly in that Mozartian feel. And it also uses a lot of passages that are pretty reminiscent to our scale practice. So even if it's not exactly written out as a scale, it's in little groups of the notes that come in our scales. So we might play 3 or 4 notes of the scale and then go up one and come back down 3 or 4 more notes of the scale. But it's all centered around the key of C major. So if we've been practicing our C major scales, this excerpt will seem a lot more manageable the very first time that we sight read it. So here's Mozart's 41st Symphony. This is from the 4th movement. I'm going to start at the second ending and play until the end of the piece. So my last excerpt today is from Richard Strauss's opera Elektra. Mill City String Quartet got to play Elektra together back in October and November of 2019, which was really special. It was the first time all 4 of us had gotten to play an opera together. So I'm gonna start around rehearsal 22, and go through a couple bars after rehearsal 29. Electra is an amazing opera. It has so many different string parts. There are like 3 or 4 parts per instrument, and they're all doing different things, so it's really exciting. But you also have to keep track of where you are. It's a big part of playing Strauss's music in general. He uses a lot of chromaticism. He changes time signatures a lot. He'll change clefs frequently, and some tricky rhythms come into play in Richard Strauss's music. So I chose this excerpt because it shows a bit of all of that. It starts out in 3/4 time, kind of like a waltz feel. It switches to 2/4, and then it switches tempos so that what was our 3/4 tempo is now the pulse of our 2/4 tempo. So there's almost some math involved. It also has a lot of dynamic changes, clef changes. There's some very quick passing back and forth from arco to pits, just a lot of things to keep your brain active. So if we were going to sight read this, we would want to try to also look for those accidentals to make sure, like, okay, I'm going to carry those through the bar. And then check in, like I said, with our section leaders and our conductor to make sure that we're rhythmically tracking. Thanks so much for joining me today and listening to my tips about sight reading. I hope that they're helpful for your future orchestra or chamber music experiences. And thanks again to the Brit Festival for bringing these videos to you. The next time that you go to Jacksonville and get a place on the lawn to watch the Brit Festival Orchestra, just think that at some point they were all sight reading for the first time. And then they took their parts home, they practiced, they brought it back together to bring you the wonderful concerts that you can hear at the Brit Festival. Thanks.